So we've been looking at problems having to do with interpretation, conflicting dictates, and selective adherence with respect to the Bible, using the Bible as an example of an authoritative moral report. Now, we focused on the Christian Bible for a couple of different reasons. For one thing, Christianity is the dominant religion in the United States, but also religions offer their adherents a worldview, which includes a recipe for how to conduct their lives in accordance with their religious ideology. And so they tend to have a bunch of purported normative ethical prescriptions. It's perfectly natural. We want to not focus exclusively on the Bible, however, because we want to see that this is true for any purported authoritative moral report. And so in this module, we're going to briefly look at other religious texts. And specifically, we'll look at the Book of Mormon, and we'll look at the Quran. After we look at these two texts, then we'll shift again and focus in for the final part of the lecture on secular and legal authority. Specifically, we'll look at the Bill of Rights and issues having to do with interpretation, conflicting dictates, and selective adherence with regard to the Bill of Rights. We'll finish then with the summary of the lecture overall. So we want to be clear that we're not attacking Christianity per se, and we're certainly not attacking religion per se. What we're looking at is whether or not purported authoritative texts can provide one with a means of unquestioning acceptance of correct moral norms. And the conclusion that I think is coming into focus here is that even if we have an inspired moral report, there are still issues that require the giving of reasons and the evaluation of reasons. There is no one-step fix, even in the case of what we feel are divinely inspired moral reports. So let's look now at the Book of Mormon. And I'm just going to pull up a few quotes here illustrating that the issues of interpretation and conflicting dictates and selective adherence arise not just in the case of the Bible, but in the case of the Book of Mormon, in the case of the Quran, and even in the case of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So here we'll look at 4:10. And it came to pass that I was constrained by the Spirit that I should kill Laban. But I said in my heart, never at any time have I shed the blood of a man. And I shrunk, and would that I might not slay him. Therefore I did obey the voice of the Spirit. And I took Laban by the hair of the head, and I smote off his head with his own sword. We can find similar morally questionable passages in the Quran. So for example, this first passage here, your women are a tilleth for you to cultivate, so go to your tilleth as you will, and send good deeds before you for your souls, and fear Allah, and know that ye will one day meet him, be glad tidings to believers. So this is a pretty misogynist picture of women. Women are just being objectified as the earth, whose purpose is to be cultivated by men. And we find similar difficulties with this extreme retributive justice down here at 538. As for the thief, both male and female, cut off their hands. It is the reward of their own deeds, an exemplary punishment from Allah. Allah is mighty and wise. So if a child steals a pack of gum from a candy store, we're encouraged to cut that child's hand off. Let's now finish up this module by switching to our next topic. So again, we want to make sure that we're not merely focusing on religion. Instead, what we want to do is look at properties of authoritative sources. And one of the things that all of these religious texts have in common with the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights is that they were written hundreds of years ago. And they reflect the ethical precepts of the people who wrote them. We want to now look at the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The First Amendment is the first of 10 amendments to the Constitution offered as a single group to the states for ratification in 1789 by James Madison. He introduced the Bill of Rights, which was adopted in 1791, to assuage fears that the Constitution provided insufficient guarantees of civil liberties for citizens. So unlike the case with a particular religious text, everyone within the United States is at least implicitly agreed to abide by the dictates of the Constitution as they are interpreted and understood. Additionally, we can see the process of gaining agreement through giving and evaluating reasons in the way in which an amendment gets introduced to the Constitution by popular vote. Nevertheless, we can see that the problem of conflicting dictates still emerges. So in the case of the Alien and Sedition Acts passed in 1798, the Fourth Act, an act for the punishment of certain crimes against the United States, declares it illegal to write, print, utter, or publish, or shall cause, or procure to be written, printed, uttered, or published, or shall knowingly and willingly assist or aid in writing, printing, uttering, or publishing any false, scandalous, and malicious writing or writing against the government of the United States. So this seemed to impinge upon the freedom of speech, and both Jefferson and Madison argued that the Alien and Sedition Acts were unconstitutional. Virginia and Kentucky passed resolutions denouncing the acts. However, they expired in 1801 before any resolution emerged. Indeed, it wasn't until 1803 when Marbury versus Madison first set the precedent of judicial review of laws for their constitutionality. And so we can see that the introduction of judicial review is part of a package that attempts to deal with conflicting dictates by the process of giving and evaluating reasons. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 again criminalized any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language directed at the government, the flag, or armed forces, or that somehow causes derisive sentiments in others for the government or its institutions. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the first official judicial interpretation of the First Amendment in the case of Schleswig versus the United States. The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances that are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger, and that they will bring about substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. In 1969, the Supreme Court introduced the current interpretation in Brandenburg versus Ohio. The ruling stated that the principle that the constitutional guarantees of free speech and free press do not allow a state to forbid or prescribe advocacy of the use of force or law violation except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or cause such action. Now, this interpretation prohibits the government from criminalizing written or spoken acts unless the source intends to incite lawless action and the act makes such lawless actions probable in that circumstance. In the next and last lecture module, we'll look at the Second Amendment as an issue of interpretation, and we'll summarize the points of the lecture overall.